Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Build to Last. We're pushing ahead with the business of today. We move closer to the center with respect to what SMEs are about, what do we want to do at Sasol to help SMEs. And for this session, we actually brought you somebody who's quite passionate about SME development, very quite passionate about the regulation that exists in that space in South Africa. In fact, she was part of the team that actually developed the code of practices for BEE. So she's been quite involved in SME development, small business development and support, helping a lot of companies to incorporate all of those needs in terms of good practices of the legislations that exist in South Africa. Her name is Mpuphi Khupe. She's going to be talking about accessing opportunities in the digital era. In fact, I think she'll also talk about how to make use of Sivoli, because Sasol is adopting that in terms of how Sasol is going to present opportunities for SMEs. So with that, I would like to call Mpuphi to the stage to take us through the agenda of sharing insights on how SMEs can access opportunities in the world of today. Thank you.
Thank you for that generous introduction. The purpose of today's presentation is really to help all of us make sense of and try to navigate this new world in which we're operating, and which really is trying to access opportunities in the digital era. I think you will agree with me that what COVID has literally done to most businesses, but I think particularly small businesses, is it's forced us to change our minds about the way we typically engage and attract customers, and also the way that we go about speaking to the world about who we are and what we do. So the most part of this presentation will focus on speaking to how it is that you need to evolve in the way you communicate, not necessarily evolve what you do, but the way that you present your company and your offering to the world, and of course then how that can help you translate into accessing opportunities in this digital era. So the online attention, you will agree, is the new gold. Previously, if you had a decent company profile and a website, you were pretty much good to go in how it is that you're going to engage your customers. But the absence of being able to meet in person has forced us to think about how it is that we would still want to equally engage our customers, but doing so through online platforms. And the converse of that is also how it is that our customers can then engage us using online platforms. Of course, we all want to access opportunities, but I find that what we need to focus on, or at least prioritize in the context of COVID, is to make sure that you take care of some housekeeping that has helped you to digitize how it is that you communicate before you can then attract the opportunities that you're looking to have through the same digital platforms that we're referring to. So in essence, you would like to broadcast your brand to the world, and ideally the manner in which you do so will help you to then in turn attract your customer. So I would like to speak a little bit around how it is that you should ideally be looking to broadcast your brand to the world, and the tweaks or the changes that I think you need to consider making to make sure that the manner in which you're broadcasting this brand and attracting the customer makes sense in the context of the digital world that we now operate in. I thought it would be useful to give a bit of context around the statistics that almost demonstrate the business case for why it is so critical that we make sure that as small businesses, we don't get left behind as corporates and also other businesses start to evolve and start to engage more through online platforms. According to a survey that was done by Hootsuite, South Africans are the 4 largest users in the world, certainly for the countries that were surveyed. They spend the most time on the internet. So that tells you that people are on their phones, they're on their laptops, they're looking for products and services and a variation of other things through the internet. So that makes it very clear that if you're not communicating with your customers through that channel, you're losing out on quite a captive audience. In addition, not only are South Africans the fourth largest users or consumers of the time that they spend on the internet, but they are spending the bulk of that time on three main channels: on Facebook, on YouTube, and on WhatsApp. We will all have observed the integration between Facebook and WhatsApp, and the extent to which it enables the business world to operate fluidly between the two channels. Of course, then it goes without say that we should be looking to optimally leverage those type of platforms. So against that background, then, I ask the question, how are you talking to them? How are you talking to your clients and your customers? First of all, through the internet, and secondly, through the platforms that have been indicated to be the ones on which people, and people, by the way, are individuals, whether you're doing business to consumer or business to business engagements. So how are you speaking to this captive audience that's spending at least 10 hours of their time daily on the internet? I would like to just say, certainly when we had to evolve into digitizing how we communicate with our clients, we found it to be quite the maze. You will agree with me that some of the terms can be quite confusing, and here I'm just trying to throw some of them out just to help you kind of acquaint yourself with the language, but not necessarily to spend too much time on this particular slide. But where are you with your digital marketing overall? Do you have the likes of a great website? A great website is a responsive website that's going to attract an audience naturally to it. And I make that point because I find that in certain instances, you start a business, you create a website, and you kind of look away from it, and you never go back to review it. In the context of COVID, are we still convinced that our website is doing us justice? The same is true of your CRM. The same is true of other marketing vehicles that you may be looking to use, including video, or particularly video. Without going into too much detail around that, I'm sure you'll agree that whenever you're online and you're on any platform, the content that attracts you the most is video content. So have you stayed up to date in that respect, both your website and the manner in which you're communicating with your clients through the channels that should complement the content on your website? When it comes to evolving to the digital world, though, what I encourage small businesses to do is, to the extent that you can, keep it simple, because it can be quite confusing and it can be quite overwhelming. But the basics are the basics. And what are the basics? Is my logo optimal? Have I reviewed my logo? Do I need to review my logo? The same is true of the website, as I made the point before. But also, and I think for me, this is probably what is critical, do I feel that my brand represents my brand why? So when anybody experiences my brand, is it clear what it is that I'm trying to communicate? Is it consistently communicated? And does it prompt action from the audience to whom I'm communicating this brand? If you can answer those questions, answer them honestly, and have the courage to address them, I think you're well on your way. But how does one go about doing so? Forgive me, let me go back to the previous slide. There's a point that I wanted to make. 83% of people globally feel that brands should be using their social channels to create a sense of community and support. That really supports the point that I was making about the brand why. If your audience doesn't get the sense that you're supporting the community, then they're probably going to be disconnected from your brand. So you need to nail your brand why so that you can attract the very consumer from whom you're seeking to make a sale. Don't be afraid to change your mind about what you have in place. Don't be afraid to review and redesign your logo. Don't be afraid to do the same for your website. Have the courage to create a blog. Start proactively engaging your customers. The great thing about tools such as blogs is it showcases you as a subject matter expert in the field in which you operate, and it starts to give a little bit of your personality to the audience that you're speaking to without necessarily being at the point where you're trying to make a sale. So in its own way, it does start to draw in the customer. Make SOE a priority. If you have a website up and you're creating good content, surely you want to start getting some return on that in driving traffic to the content and, of course, to the website. But also make sure that when you do drive traffic, you have an action that you want the user to take, start utilizing social media. I think that goes without say. The bulk of the companies the SMEs that we work with have evolved from I have a marketing strategy to I have a digital marketing strategy. And within my digital marketing strategy, I have a very strong social media strategy because I cannot engage with my customer face to face or in person. So I've got to be nailing the way I'm communicating with them through these digital mechanisms. Capitalize on email marketing. Typically, you have a captive audience, previous clients, prospective clients. What is it that you're doing to communicate with those clients through your email marketing? This could be very strongly supported by the blog that we referred to earlier. But the point is, start proactively creating the journey to a sale without necessarily looking to close it at that time. But at least you know that you've engaged with your potential customers or your existing customers, you've kept their attention, and when the right time comes, the conversion will happen from a sale perspective. Invest in paid ads. This can be quite a controversial one because, of course, we are all trying to keep the budgets lean, and we don't necessarily have the extra funds to pay for anything, let alone adverts. But if you choose the right ones for the right reasons, and again, this is when you've gotten crystal clear on your brand why, you will find that it's money worth spending, and it will create or generate very strong leads that will convert at a higher rate than if you're just leveraging your free platforms. And then encourage online reviews. Nothing sells greater than word of mouth. And if your clients are the ones that are vouching for you, naturally they will attract other people because they'll be making a statement about the extent to which they trust your brand. Of course, this only works if you're nailing it. So make sure that what you're selling, how you're selling, and the manner in which you're delivering keeps you honest to the brand promise that you've made to the client. And then encourage them to provide you with the reviews. And then also establish content partnerships. I'm not a great writer. So I find that the content partnerships that we have established really give us a lot of equity on the kind of content that we're able to produce. All of these, of course, do require some level of investment, but don't be shy to make that investment because I argue that the money that we traditionally would spend on that which we call marketing previously is simply just being redirected. So you're not spending more, you're just spending differently. But you must understand that you've got to put in that investment, otherwise you won't derive the return. I appreciate that our key interest typically as SMEs is accessing opportunities. But I'm saying, if you don't take care of the housekeeping of how you're putting yourself out there, you're limiting the manner in which you're going to access those opportunities. So the two go hand in hand. Online platforms are central to the development of digital economies and societies. I think the case has been really strongly made by COVID. But as I said, it can all feel like quite a maze. So you need to sift through the noise and decide for yourself what it is that matters, why it is that matters, and what it is that you're trying to derive from that exercise. So you take this journey, you do your brand audit, you agree with your partners, your digital marketing partners, that is, on how it is that you want to position yourself out there. And once you've taken care of that housekeeping, I argue that then you are in a better position to then start looking for the opportunities that we're talking about. There are various platforms out there that one can look for opportunities on. I find that when it comes to tenders, it's very easy to run a quick Google search and you'll come across a number of platforms. I'm going to cite some examples, but I would like to emphasize that I'm citing these as examples. It's by no means a representation of what I believe is out there. I find that because of the digital world that we're operating in, almost every other week there is a new platform. So it's also equally important for you to invest the time in checking what's out there and engaging with it. But the examples that I would like to cite from a tender perspective and I cite these also because you don't necessarily have to pay to access these websites. So there's an example is SA Tenders. There's another example which is online tenders. And there are other variations of similar ones that, it's easy tenders and this tenders. So on those websites, you would typically find what I'm calling tenders. Of course, the bulk of them are government, but there are some private. I would like to use this point then to speak to another point I would like to highlight. Your submission will only be as good as your preparedness. So again, your preparedness is going to leverage the elements that I've just touched on your logo, your website, etc., etc. And of course, then in your submission, it will be a response to whether it's an RFP, RFQ, or RFI. But in addition to that, preparedness is making sure that from a compliance perspective and in terms of the supporting documents that are required, that you tick those boxes. I chose not to touch on that too much today because I think we're all familiar with that which is relevant to us in terms of the compliance and those typical mandatory requirements. Make sure you take good care of those as well, because there's no point in having a brand that you represent well, but you don't meet the minimum requirements of your client from a compliance and mandatory requirements point of view. Having said that, when you then put together that submission and submit it to the client, make sure that you are indeed completing all of their requirements. So that's on the tender side. One of the struggles that I think we continue to exist, and I believe we continue to exist, we continue to experience, is the absence of a cohesive platform through which we can have line of sight of private sector opportunities. In as much as navigating the digital marketing world is a maze, I think having line of sight of opportunities with private sector, particularly in a digitized manner, is equally a maze. I must say it's a science that I don't believe we've mastered. But I would like to touch on the business case then for Linkage, and I imagine that we're all familiar with Linkage. Linkage seeks to be the equivalent of the tender websites that I've almost cited, but in the private sector space. Our argument is there's got to be an aggregated way that SMEs are able to view private sector opportunities. Of course, there's a role to be played and there's an argument to be made about the development of the SMEs, but that's not the topic for today. The topic for today is how do we solve the problem of making sure that there's an aggregated view of private sector opportunities that SMEs can, at a click of a button, be able to access. And that's part of the problem that the Linkage platform is trying to solve. I say trying because, of course, the journey continues. But for now, in the absence of a platform of that nature having gained enough momentum to aggregate opportunities, I find that the best way to engage, again, digitally with potential private sector clients is having taken care of your digital marketing elements, and for example, out of that you have a company profile that's compelling, that's aligned to your brand why, that's crisp, and that's concise, and that will draw the attention of whoever it is that you're speaking to. LinkedIn is an incredible platform for you to start to engage your potential customers. So don't be afraid to use platforms of that nature that you may typically not have considered, but now you need to start to leverage, especially, as I say, in the context of the private sector engagements and then the absence of an aggregated view of private sector opportunities. I'm convinced that the aggregation of the private sector opportunities will evolve very quickly because we need to find an efficient way of giving that line of sight to SMEs. But in the absence of that, I say take this into your own hands. Make sure you sort out your digital marketing and identify the platforms through which you want to communicate with your clients. And don't be afraid to contact people on the likes of LinkedIn. It's an incredibly powerful platform. It's a business platform. So one is expecting that you're engaging with them for business purposes. So leverage them. And as you do that, you will become acquainted with other ways in which you can engage your customers digitally. And as you leverage those, you will continuously then access those or attract the opportunities that you're trying to access. So it's not always a pull, sometimes it's not always a push, sometimes it is a little bit of a pull. The same way you're going out to look for customers, make sure that you're equally the magnet that is attracting those customers. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you about this topic.
Apologies for that.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't want to let you run quite.
And I literally was trying to run there.
I could see that. So we do have some of the engagements that are coming through our online channels, and the audiences want to engage with you and ask a couple of questions.
Yes.
And I think one major question that comes up, I think actually most of them they refer to this question, is there's this Sasol platform that Sasol tries to use.
Yes.
It's Linkage, and it appears to be owned by Zivoli.
Yes.
Do you want to share thoughts on that in terms of how that works? What is the strategic intent behind it? how can, what should SMEs expect, when and how?
Yes. Okay, so yes, I did allude to the fact that almost the business case for linkage is the fact that in the private sector context, there isn't this aggregated view of opportunities. We find that it's very relationship driven. You've got to be almost at the right place at the right time. There's a science to it that I don't think it remains a mystery to small businesses. So the problem that linkage was trying to solve is to say there are two main arguments in the market that you hear repeatedly around small businesses. And it's typically, I'm reluctant to use a small business because I don't know them. And if I know them, I don't trust their capabilities. So linkage is a response to say, we want to give access to markets to small businesses, but we also want to take care of the concerns or the perceived risks that come with using a small business. So linkage then addresses both sides of the coin by engaging with SMEs for purposes of developing them to close their gaps. And then when those gaps have been closed and we're satisfied that this guy is, we use the term platinum graded, we then put them in front of procurement opportunities. So Sasol, of course, is using the linkage platform to solve exactly those two issues, to say we have a captive audience of SMEs in all the areas in which we operate. They're hungry for opportunities, but we've got to find a mechanism that allows us to develop them, and once we're satisfied that they meet our standard, platinum standard, we then put them in front of the procurement opportunities. So you'll find that the platform services both those clients or internal stakeholders equally. And this is not only true of Sasol, as I said, it's a platform that we're looking to launch with other clients as well.
Great, and I would like to put you on the spot because this is one of the questions that was asked earlier. And given your background, I would like you to share your thoughts on this, and we can wrap it up quickly. So one of the concerns that came out earlier from the SMEs was we tend to come up with these big initiatives, and most of those initiatives, they don't have the capabilities to operate at large scale. And then what tends to happen is big suppliers get these opportunities and then they get to be subcontracted for these opportunities. But that is not always, it's not as profitable as you would get your own opportunity.
Absolutely.
How can we break down that space? A perspective could be, break this things into small things in order to, do you want to share some thoughts there?
Absolutely.
Maybe?
I mean, first of all, that's a great question. And secondly, completely agree with the sentiment that's being expressed. Our greatest frustration has to be exactly that. So we are in the space of developing SMEs. It's our passion, we love it, and we believe that SMEs should be brought to the table to share equally in economic activity, right? It's our fundamental belief. However, development does not unlock an opportunity if post-development you're still comparing a small business to an established big entity. So part of the engagements that we have with our clients, both in the development journey, but also in their activity of issuing RFPs, RFQs, part of what we do is we engage our clients very actively on what are your RFP requirements? And what about those requirements is potentially prohibitive for a small business? And how negotiable are you on those? So I'll give you a very practical example. So in certain industries, it's not true of all industries, you will be asked to have public liability, or professional cover. And it will be stated at a specific amount. And then my question is, if you're going to give me a 5 million rand contract and you're saying I should have, let's call it 20 million rand cover, does that make sense? Yeah. So then let's negotiate on the level of cover that you're asking me to do, because then I can afford that premium as an argument. But that's the one thing that we do. The other thing that we do is we equally engage our clients to say, of course, it's ideal to manage one contract. It's a national provider, and they do cleaning services, let's say, as an example, for all your offices. But by virtue of the fact that you want it to be a national contract, you've shut out SMEs. So let's break it down to whether it's regions, whether it's sites, et cetera, because that barrier to entry is immediately reduced. So we're very active and deliberate in doing that work. However, we find that in certain industries or in certain products and certain services, it's important for the SME to be paired with the bigger entity so they can master the craft. And when we get to the point where they've got the capacity, the capability, sometimes it's even the balance sheet.
Yep.
Then we can say to the client, we believe this guy is ready. So the dynamic is not a copy and paste across the board, but we identify that which we regard as a barrier to entry in that particular environment, and we question how is it that we should lower this barrier, and what is it that we need to reconsider to make sure that more SMEs can participate actively.
Wow, Pupi, your eyes are lighting up. I think this is a passion.
It is.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. I think it's good to have you. It's been great. Would like to be in touch with you. I personally would like to keep contact so I can learn a lot from you. Do you have any social media platforms where our audiences can follow you?
Absolutely. So we are on LinkedIn. I mean, I've just preached that gospel, so it would be hilarious if we weren't on. So we're on LinkedIn, we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook. I'm told we need to consider getting on TikTok. I'm still trying to understand some of these platforms. But our website
handle?
is Zivoli GP. I think that would
Zivoli
also be our
GP?
Twitter handle.
Nice.
I think. But yeah, it's Zivoli GP on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter.
Great.
But the company is Zivoli Growth Partners.
Thank you.